Ever wonder what really happens to your bait scent once it hits the water? Now you're about to see the unseen. We are diving deep to unveil the shocking truth of how scent truly disperses underwater and how to use the learnings to drastically improve your chances of catching fish. Prepare to rethink everything you thought you knew about bait scent. Now when it comes to bait scent or fish attractant for artificial baits, people tend to divide into two sides. One thinks it's a total waste of money, and the other thinks it truly works. The fact? To fully decipher it, let's start by explaining how scent works on human being, ourselves. You just got out of water after days fishing and felt hungry. Now decide to grab something to eat. Driving into a strip mall you've never been to, you notice the big red Texas Roadhouse banner on the other side of the parking lot. Yay, prime rib for dinner! And start to walk toward the steakhouse. Now halfway through, you smell fried chicken, and you turn around and saw a KFC hiding in the corner on the other side. Then you think to yourself, now just an hour ago, I lost a Megabus 110 to a freaking pickerel. Now, if I go KFC, I can happily get another 110 without guilty feeling by just pretending to have been eaten prime rib at Texas Roadhouse. So, KFC that is. Now you made a turn, walked into KFC, grabbed the 2 pieces of fried chicken, and ordered another 110. Happy camper. Now what this tells us is, when we human beings look for food, vision and smell both works. You see Texas Roadhouse first, then you smell KFC. Similarly, when fish look for food, they also use vision and scent, now plus hearing and detection of vibration. To understand if bait scent or fish attractant is effective or not, we must understand how it works and how impactful it can be for fish foraging activities. Now let's do a quiz first. Now, what is the biggest difference between smelling/tasting versus seeing and hearing? Now, what we see is the absorption and reflection of light, and what we hear is the sound source propagating through a medium and ultimately vibrating our eardrums. Now, in a sense, both are the perception of energy. However, smell and taste, on the other hand, require molecules from the target to enter the nasal or oral cavities so that they can interact with the receptors there, which in turn will generate neuron signals sending to the brain, and the molecules that you smell and taste were actually originally a part of the target. Think about this. Now when you see the banner of Texas Roadhouse, it's only the light. But when you smell KFC, the part you smell or the stuff that went into your nose was actually on the chicken in the frying pot just a minute ago. So smell and the taste is a perception of material. Material versus energy, this is the fundamental difference between smell, taste versus hearing and seeing. Now same goes to the fish attractants or bait scents. To make the attractant or scent work, small part of the attractant must get into physical contact with the fish. Now let's watch a little experiment underwater. Now on the screen, the dark blue stuff is a puddle of water-soluble dye on the bottom of a bucket of water. Now we're looking at its diffusion or dispersion in still water. In fast motion, the timer on the upper left is the real time. Now we see that the dye dispersion takes time. It doesn't turn the entire bucket of water blue instantly upon being added, but rather it's a gradual process. Now furthermore, dispersion has a direction. Now without the influence of flow, the blue dye travels from high concentration to low concentration, forming a concentration gradient, meaning the concentration decreases with increasing distance from the center of dispersion. Dispersion is a slow process. After 7 to 8 minutes, it only traveled about 10 inches radius. Now imagine the blue dye is the fish attractant you applied on the lure, or simply a piece of squid or clam, and all the tasty stuff that's supposed to attract the fish will need to go through the same process of dispersion into water. Now what this experiment tells us is, 1. The dispersion of fish attractant takes time. 2. When it disperses, the farther the distance to the bait, the lower the amount of attractant. Together, for the attractant to reach a relatively high concentration at distance, it takes a lot of attractant to begin with and also a lot of time. This is very important. Keep in mind, in addition, another major driving force to disperse the attractant is the current or water flow. Now, water flow typically speeds up the dispersion of attractant, but remember, it still takes time for attractant to reach far, just faster. It also still forms gradient even in current. So this is how fish attractant gets away from the bait to reach the fish, but this is only step one. Now once it reaches the smell sensor of the fish, either the nasal duct or the oral cavity or whiskers, to have an effective trigger of the fish, there are several other factors we need to discuss. What makes fish react to scent? Now let's look at this. Now, most of us can taste the vinegar. Why? Because the active ingredient, the acetic acid, has the right shape to interact with our taste bud that is specifically responsive to the sourness. Now, if you add some sugar to a glass of water, you won't taste the sourness because sugar does not have the right shape to interact with your sourness taste bud. But if you add 2 drops of vinegar to a glass of water and take a sip, you can probably immediately taste the sourness. Now, on the other hand, if you add 2 drops of vinegar to a bathtub full of water and then take a sip, you are probably not going to taste anything as long as the bath water is clean in the first place, because the amount of vinegar in your sip is very, very small, aka the concentration of vinegar is below the taste threshold. Now, exactly the same principles apply to fish attractant. For this to be effective, the attractant must have the right substance and enough concentration. Or in other words, the active ingredients must have the right shape to bind with the right kind of taste bud of the fish. And there also must have enough amount of the active ingredient to bind enough amount of the taste buds to be able to trigger neuron signal. The amount should at least be above the taste or smell threshold. Then the interaction with taste buds can result in enough neurotransmitters to be released to form an effective signal sent to the brain and make the fish to react. Now, in addition, different fish species have different levels of olfactory sensitivity. Now, the more sensitive the sense of smell and taste, the fewer molecules are required to trigger the olfactory and gustatory nerve reflexes, and the lower the taste smell threshold. This means for catfish and bass living in the same bathtub, the catfish would notice 1 drop of vinegar in the bathtub, while bass wouldn't know until you add 1 tablespoon to the tub. But remember, earlier we talked about when fish attractant disperses in the water, it forms a gradient of concentration. Now, the farther away from the center, the less amount of attractant, right? So let's assume the brand company did a good job doing the research and selects the ingredient with the right shape that can interact with the fish sensors. Whether it really works or not in the real world is really a question of whether enough of this ingredient can reach the taste or smell threshold in the fish sensor organ within a practical amount of time. Now let me translate to real-world fishing scenario. Now let's say you are using a shrimp extract as a scent on a Texas-rigged beaver. Now let's use those tiny shrimps to represent the scent molecules. After your beaver gets into the water, assume you just let it sit on the bottom, dead sticking. The shrimp molecules disperse continuously. Remember, the catfish has a better sense of smell, so if 5 shrimps are enough for it to detect the scent, the bass will need 70. So after 2 minutes, there are 5 tiny shrimps reach the fish, and the catfish is activated. Then traces the tiny shrimps along the direction of gradient, but the bass at that moment has no idea. So 4 minutes after your bait hits the water, the catfish arrives, but the bass won't arrive 15 or 20 minutes later. Now that is assuming you don't move your bait and you have enough tiny shrimps to begin with. So at some point, there will be 70 of these tiny shrimps 10 meters or 30 feet away from your bait for the bass to have an effective smell or taste. Now, let's say there's another catfish 20 meters or 60 feet away from your bait. Now, if your shrimp extract was applied at a low dosage, the time required to reach a sufficient concentration at 20 meters will be longer. And if the dosage is insufficient, there may never be more than 5 shrimp at 20 meters. And the catfish 20 meters away from your bait will never smell it. Now, therefore, all fish attractants have these two characteristics. One, they cannot take effect immediately when dropped into the water. Two, their range of action is limited, and the closer they are to the fish, the more effective they are. Does fish attractant attract the fish? Now, if you want to attract a sensitive fish such as a shark from distance, you need to chum, throw in buckets and buckets load of fish guts and blood, and etc. For carp fishing, folks throw tens of kilos of corn, flour, and pelleted feed to one spot and wait for hours and even days. And that's what needs to be done to actually attract fish from distance, using only scent and smell. Now, if you are targeting bass or trout, they are primarily visual predators. As mentioned earlier, fish like bass and trout have relatively poor sense of smell. On the other hand, typically we cannot apply a ton of attractants on our tiny lures, certainly not bucket loads. And remember, your lure is constantly moving too. So for typical lure attractants, it is practically impossible to create an effective concentration at distance within the time when you present your lure. Therefore, it's very difficult to attract a fish from distance in a short period of time with that small amount of attractant we apply. Calling them fish attractants is really nothing but a gimmick. Flavor enhancer would be a more accurate description. Do flavor enhancers enhance bites? The short answer is they do. For instance, when a fish takes a bite, the flavor allows it to taste it, delaying spitting out the bait by a second or two, giving us the time to set the hook. Or sometimes, fish that weren't initially planning to hit or swallow the lure might reflexively hit or swallow it because of the flavor. We have a fish story to tell you. Okay, so I'm on St. Lawrence River, bed fishing, big time. I found this giant on the bed. Looks like a post-spawn big female. So we tried literally every single thing. Not interested at all, okay? Turned around, called a little guy over there and come back and was like, let's give it a shot because we have not tested the fish scent yet. I was like, if any chance it will work, it will be the fish scent in this situation. Super tough scenario. Big fish. We really want it. Okay. This was when I pulled out the bait field and applied some on the drop shot rig, the P-shad. And first cast, a few seconds after the rig hits the bottom, she turned around and bumped it. I immediately knew something has changed. So I applied more bait fuel, and at next cast, a few seconds later again, the dark log turned around and swam directly toward the white bait. Now I saw the white color disappeared as the dark shadow moved in like slow motion all in front of my eyes. Then
Oh my god! Look at that! Oh! We spent like 2 hours! Scent, bait feel. Nothing better than this. Oh my god! Look at this! Oh my god, look at this! Floor. Oh my god! This is a 6-pounder at least.
That was actually my second biggest smallmouth ever. Now, more importantly, a fish we worked hard for. Eventually, we cracked the code, and the secret was the scent. The past hour when she was not even turning the head versus immediately turn around, hit and swallow. Plus, both of us saw this happening right in front of our eyes. Now, I cannot think of another example so convincing that scent truly does work. I could also not think of another example explain so well what we have just discussed. Now, when it is within a short distance from the fish, the bait scent works. The fact that both times it took her a couple of seconds to react clearly shows it was the scent, and that time lag was the time the scent took to disperse out. Now, when I applied the second time, I squeezed a bunch on the bait, which in turn certainly increased the concentration that entered the smallies' mouth and nose, giving it a much stronger trigger, meaning it definitely needs to reach certain concentration for it to work. So you have probably heard a pretty well-known research which shows bass are sensitive to scent and can even use scent from distance. Now, in those particular examples, the researchers were studying the nest guarding males. Now, they took the fish away across the lake and released them, and then found those fish actually back on the beds after a while. So did I just say scent only works in short distance? Now, is this contradictory to the research? No, actually not. Now, here we are comparing two sources of scents, your lure and the bass bed. Now, your lure is only in the water for a few minutes and is constantly moving. The amount of attractant that you can apply is also limited. A bass bed, however, if already has eggs or fry on it, that means this bed has been at the same place for at least a couple of days or even weeks. And the amount of eggs or fry on it will almost certainly excrete chemicals. And these chemicals has been dispersing for a long time from the same location, thus establishing a steady traceable gradient of bass egg or fry scent, making it possible for the male bass to trace the gradient from far away. In other words, these two sources of scent are fundamentally different. This example to me really does not necessarily mean bass heavily rely on scent for foraging activities. Now, as a rule of thumb, if you want to leverage the power of scent or flavor enhancer, remember this fast, far, and more principle. So any factor that is going to make the fish attractant travel faster, farther, and reaches higher concentration in water will make the bait scent more effective. And in particular, higher temperature makes the dispersion quicker. A higher amount of attractant makes it disperse quicker as well, travels longer distance, plus a better chance to stay above the smell or taste threshold when it reaches the fish. The formulation of the attractant also matters. Most of the highly water-soluble additives results in a quick burst of concentration in a short time, but once they dissolve and you don't have much left on the bait. Now, oil-based scent, like smelly jelly, it stays around much longer than the water-soluble formulations. But it won't form a concentration hike like the water-soluble scents. It is more like a slow and steady release of relatively low amount of scents. But since the sticky ointment tends to stick on the bait much longer, when the fish bites, chances are it can still taste the flavor. Thus, you might still be able to enjoy its delayed spit effect 30 minutes later. To extend the effective time of the scent additives, Remember to always apply in the crevice or holes on the bait, such as inside the tube or within the hook point crevice, etc., where it cannot be easily washed away by water. Now, if you only apply on the smooth outside of the soft plastic, in current or in deeper water, when it hits the bottom, it's probably already washed clean. Now, talking about current, a scent works better in flowing water than in still water. Now, this is because the forced dispersion of the current allows the flavor enhancer to reach downstream fish more quickly. Because vision, hearing, and vibration detection can all occur quickly from distance, while scent or flavor rely on material dispersion to reach threshold concentration, which takes both time and material. So in lure fishing, visual, sound, and vibration are the factors that actually attract fish. Flavor additives, no matter how they claim it to attract fish, do not work from distance in practical amount of time. It is an enhancer that works in short radius and give anglers better chance to set the hook. Therefore, don't assume the additives give you insurance and neglect the importance of picking the right spot, using the right technique, and choosing the right bait, and being adaptable. So, we have dived deep and explained how these fish attractants actually work. I hope this helped you to navigate through all the hypes and finding niche situations to unlock the potential of these additives. And with that, tight lines until next time.